Hello and welcome to another episode of Weapons and Warfare for Straight Arrow News. I'm your host, Ryan Robertson, and this week, guys, we have something special for you. A conversation with one of the creative forces behind Old Glory Studios. Started by combat veterans and experienced game developers Louis Manilow and Matt Patak, Old Glory Studios boasts more than 25 years of expertise in the gaming industry. Before starting Old Glory, Manilow and Patak helped create some of the most renowned tactical shooter games out there, some of my favorites, infusing their real-life experiences into the game development process. So, ahead of their release, Victory's Grave: Outflank, a squad-based shooter that's set in a post-apocalyptic version of 1980s Eastern Europe, I sat down with Louis to talk about his journey to becoming a video game developer. All right, Louis Manilow, thank you so much for joining us today, co-founder of Old Glory Studios, also an Army veteran. You served with the 82nd Airborne in Afghanistan. And truth be told, man, you worked on some of my favorite games, the Tom Clancy Ghost Recon series. You did Wildlands and Breakpoint. You were a writer on those. So I have a lot of questions for you. I'm really excited that we get a chance to talk to you. But first and foremost, how does a guy go from, jumping out of airplanes to making video games about people jumping out of airplanes into war zones?
Yeah. Well, not on purpose. So we go there. Thank you for having me, first of all. But yeah, so actually my background is actually in film and TV. So I went to NYU Film School and I graduated that in 99. So I was actually already working a little bit in the industry, working in, like doing sound recording jobs. I shot a documentary and stuff. I had, like entry level gigs. I was like, hold the tripod for the Entertainment Tonight crew that went to whatever opening, like joining the military was really far from my mind. I mean, like I'd had relatives who'd served, my mother's father was like a guerrilla fighter in the Philippines in World War II. My father's mother like got the GI Bill for something, which in the Philippines, which no one will actually like really talk about. So I don't really know what that was. Then, like I had an uncle who was a Marine and another one who was, like in the Navy. So yeah, like that, it's like, it was part of my family's kind of thing. But it wasn't anything I was going to do. But, like I said, I went to NYU and then afterwards I moved to Jersey City, which is just across the street, across the Hudson River. Right. So on September 11th, like I watched the World Trade Center fall from my window, so that's why I enlisted. And then, I did end up going to Afghanistan a couple times. But then when I got out, I tried to get back into film and film again and writing. So basically, like after a couple of years, I was, I was doing some producing for documentary films, but I also was still writing. And I had a reading of a play I wrote, and an old friend of mine came and saw it, but he happened to be working at Ubisoft at the time. And then like just knowing my background, where I'd served, but I also, the documentaries I'd shot had produced had been shot in South America, right? Like specifically in Colombia, right? So at the time, like Ubisoft was very much into authenticity, and he's like, hey, we're working on this game like Ghost Recon Wildlands. It's about these operators who are like fighting a drug cartel in South America. You want to write some stuff for us, and it was like, it was really a good fit, like as soon as I started, I was able to send him like an interview we'd had done with like a Cocalero in Colombia. You know what I mean? And basically I really enjoyed that experience, like working with him. And then after, basically I just kind of stayed on that franchise for a few more years. So yeah. And then, like I'm still writing other things as well, but basically like I'm all in on video games. So,
yeah. You bet. Well, man, like we've come a long way since, like you work on, tactical shooters and stuff. The first shooter was what, like Duck Hunt that I probably played, we've come a long way since then, right? We don't have to blow in a cartridge anymore to get it to work. It's great. But you mentioned the authenticity that Ubisoft was looking after or looking for, and you were able to bring that. So I kind of want to dive into that a little bit more.
Sure.
The game itself, man, like video games have good stories. Like the cutscenes and stuff like that. Like, my wife comes in and she's like, "Oh, it's a cutscene. I can talk to you." I'm like, "No, no. Like, I fought so I can hear what this person's about to say." Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, you feel vested in these characters, right? How much of your real life was interjected in it? How much of it was it art imitating life, and how much of it was just like, I've never actually seen this, but man, it's gonna look really cool. Like, how
Sure.
much of it was reality versus make believe?
Sure. So, again, like my mandate on Ghost Recon Wildlands was like realism. So as a writer, a lot of the story and a lot of the characters had already been created by like Don Winslow, writer of Power of the Dog and all these books. So like I didn't create like much of that, but I did write a lot of the dialogue that ends up in the game. So like, and it like I don't know how like for people who aren't familiar with the franchise, like it's kind of the dialogue is kind of the something that divides people.
There was a Sergeant Bookhart with the Rangers when I was in the sandbox back in '03.
Because people who've served, they're like, crap, that's really how people speak. You know what I mean? But the way people really speak isn't the way you often see people, military people like speak in movies and in other video games. So like that's the thing too. For better or worse, like I made it like as real as I could. Like I served in Bragg, so I made like jokes about like certain areas of Bragg, like Area J, which is like where we'd always have to go running like through sand and stuff. Things like that I'd throw in.
And that's stuff that like only people who have served and only people who have come through Bragg, like that's an Easter egg that I would never get. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's an authentic level that, for the guys who have been through it or know about it, or gals, they see it, they hear it, and they're like, "Yep." You know what I mean? Does that make you feel like, you're not making crap, you're making something that the people who have actually done this stuff would be like, "Yeah, that's accurate."
Well, yeah, it's sure. Like authenticity is like that's definitely like kind of the one of the things that I definitely want to bring, like especially for the military. But it's like all the fan reactions are great. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of the thing. So I know that probably 99.9% of the people who play the game don't know what Area J is. You know what I mean? But like just by the way that the people the way that the characters talk about it, like there should be something that is conveyed to the people that feels real. You know what I mean? Even though it's like, I'm trying to think of how else another way to explain it, but like, like the joke specifically was like, there's parts where you drive around, you can basically drive like crazy in Ghost Recon Wildlands. You can drive up like mountains and down the Andes and stuff. But basically, like I had some joke where people just go, "Oh yeah, it's just like mudding in Area J." You know what I mean? Which is like, which you weren't really allowed to do, but like on like Monday runs or something, or like if we go like on walking through there, we'd always end up seeing some truck that somebody got stuck in the mud. You know what I mean? Like up to the tops of its like wheel wells. So, but it's something. There are details like that feel real. You know what I mean? Even though they're maybe obscure to people who are in the military themselves.
You bet. I want to kind of double tap on the realism aspect of it, because there are possibilities out there that the United States could potentially find itself in a conflict with the drug cartels of South America and Central and Latin America. So having worked on a game like Wildlands, having served in the military, how much of it would be like those soft units going in, making those local connections. You gotta help this guy because they're fight. You know what I mean? Like when you play a game like Wildlands or Breaking Point, like there's the tactical level of it, and also you gotta make friends, you gotta make allies, right? Because you're gonna need those folks to help fight, because it's it's not the 82nd Airborne dropping in. It's, 4 or 5 guys here and there. Would that be how an actual conflict with the cartels might play out, in your opinion?
I mean, I think for a lot of people, it might be like the fantasy version of how it would play out, or if you're in the cartel, it might be the nightmare version of it, because definitely like the way that we tried to set up things in terms of the way that the missions flowed, and even some of the kind of Easter eggs we drop in the dialogue would allude to ways that operations would actually have worked, like, for example, in theater in Afghanistan. Like we make little nods to the activity, which I think they go by a totally different name now, but that's, basically the people who are out there gathering intel, which then the operators use to for their missions. But again, like I think because, a lot of these countries are straight up allies, you know what I mean? As in terms of the governments are allies, it's probably going to be pretty different. I mean, honestly, again, like I don't know any more than anybody else who like pays attention to the news, you know what I mean? But from my perspective, I would suspect that the real benefits to declaring a cartel like a terrorist organization come from the fact that now less people can actually work with them, So, and especially on the U.S. side of the border. You know what I mean? Like if you were or happen to be someone who was corrupt and, let's say, taking payments from the cartel, you're going to have to think about the consequences of getting caught are going to be a lot different now, or let's say you're like a lot of, because they can't use your normal banking systems, like a lot of dispensaries in some states, like they end up being like, they launder money for cartels. You know what I mean? But now it's like, oh, now you're laundering money for a terrorist, Yeah, so it's a really different. The consequences are totally different now, and that's where I think like a lot of the real differences are going to be made in terms of the enforcement. But then also, like you can see, like it also empowered the military to act very quickly. Like the 82nd Airborne is already down there. Like within 18 hours, they were down at the border. So.
All right, let's go back into video game territory a little bit more now. When we're talking about like the making sure that the dialogue is there, the nods to guys who had served and that kind of thing. So much of, obviously shooter games, third person, first person is the weaponry. How much effort did you, how much involvement did you have in making sure that the weapons that made it into the game, were true to form, and would look and feel as much as you can when you're playing on a control pad, right? But when you're like the reload and the sound, like how much input did you have in that aspect of the games?
Okay, sure. So for the actual mechanics of how it feels, the like juice of the game, like that's a whole different team, and that's like a really specialized thing, and that's why in some games it feels amazing, and in other games it might just feel a little bit off. You know what I mean? But it's like that. It's part of the 3 Cs, which is basically how you interacts with the world. So that's very specialized. I did, however, work very closely with the authenticity team that Ubisoft had at the time. Like he's no longer there, but like the guy Travis, who was like, I met him while working on this, and we're like still friends. You know what I mean? Like years later. So we worked together pretty closely, and I ended up writing. I wrote almost all the menus that are in the games, all the weapons descriptions as well. So a lot of that stuff too, it'd be like, I'd have to call them up and be like, this isn't real, is it? You know what I mean? Like you can't have like I don't know, like the upper of a 249 on the lower of a M4, right? You know what I mean? And then, so there's definitely stuff that's not real. Definitely stuff that's exaggerated. But then, there's definitely an effort, especially on Wildlands, that I know of, to really make the guns feel real, to base them on actual guns. So if I can kind of take us on a tangent, like there's basically been like an effort in the game industry to not license guns from actual gun manufacturers, which is it's kind of ironic. I think so many games are shooter games, but at the same time, they're like, oh well, we're not gonna give any money to the these evil gun manufacturers. We're just gonna copy their designs and call them something else. So that's where a lot of the honestly, so that was sort of like the leak, I guess, in authenticity started there, and now there's less and less authenticity, I think, in a lot of military games. So
yeah, you look at Call of Duty, arguably one of the most popular, first-person shooter games, and
absolutely,
my kids play it, and I watched my 14-year-old playing it the other day, and there's like the skins, you know what I mean, that they're wearing now, and it's like, is that Santa Claus and his reindeer running down with an AK? Like, what's going on here?
Like you can play as like Cheech Marin in there now and stuff.
Yeah,
and, yeah.
So that's a layer of gaming. It's not for everybody. You know what I mean? Like what I enjoyed about the games that you worked on was kind of the realism of it. And your co-founder, he worked on Division 1 and Division 2. I'm literally replaying Division 2 right now because there's the new DLC coming out. I'm like, I gotta remember how everything goes, right?
Exactly.
But you let's go to what you guys are doing now, right? Old Glory Studios. This is, you and your co-founder, Matt Patak, right?
Matt Patak, yeah.
Patak, yeah. You guys, he's also a veteran. You guys decided to come together, create a new studio for you guys to make the things that you love to make, right? So, describe what kind of games you're working on right now. You have your one, the main one, right? The showrunner, as it were, that we're hoping that, build it into a franchise, hopefully. So walk me through what Old Glory's doing right now.
Okay, sure. So, like we were talking about, a lot of games now, games that used to be this kind of like feel kind of authentic, but, we're still very accessible. They've gone kind of further, closer to more like Fortnite kind of cartoony kind of games. You can play as Snoop Dogg, which is fun. You know what I mean? And you have your like blinging AK-47 looking type gun and everything, but it doesn't feel real at all. You know what I mean? But then on the other side, there are games, let's say like Arma or Squad, which they go hardcore with the realism, and depending on who you're playing with, like it might end up it feels like you're almost doing like reenactments, you know what I mean? Or like you're basically playing in a museum kind of thing, So basically there's this big hole in the market, and it's the games that we love, So what we're trying to do is make combat games that feel, very authentic, like we were talking about with Ghost Recon, Wildlands. But then at the same time, they're still very accessible as well. Like they're not going to be like as intense into like they're not going to be as rigorous with the authenticity as like some of the like Squad, or at least some of the players in those kind of games might take things, like, oh, well, you would never reload your gun like that in 1942, things like that, So to sort of bridge that gap and still create gameplay that's still kind of fun and like basically like pretty raw, really, we set up this world where basically like it's called Victory's Grave. And kind of in the middle of like the Cold War in 1984, like in the winter, there's this huge blackout, right? So there's electricity goes off all over the world, right? So now you have soldiers on both sides of the Iron Curtain, like NATO and Warsaw Pact. They don't know what's going on. Each side thinks they're getting attacked by the other. So like they just, get reduced to Joe logic. So they just shoot, they just start shooting everything. So a war breaks out. But, like, because like the Soviet Union, as we know now, they didn't really have as many supplies. They weren't quite as strong as the front they put on, like NATO ends up pushing to the east. But then eventually like, the Soviet Union just kind of crumbles, but then, so the Cold War has been won, but now we're just left in this kind of wasteland where all these soldiers are stranded in the middle of everywhere. So some become bandits, some try to become warlords, others like still try to like go on with the mission that they had before. And within this context of Victory's Grave, our first game that we're putting together is called Victory's Grave Outflank, and Outflank is a team-based PvP game where it's 5 people versus 5 in a like an asymmetrical kind of warfare, but out in the countryside. So one group will hold like a town, and there's be an objective in the town, and another group of 5 have to attack and take over. And it's also round based because I'm in my 40s. I got kids who I want to spend time with, and we know a lot of other people like that too, right? So basically, like it'll be like divided into 10-minute rounds, and the first team to win 3 of those rounds by holding that town in the center, they win. So,
how deep are you going into? You were talking about like the complexities, and it's I got a new gun in this game. Well, what scope do you want? What do you want on the underbarrel? Do you want a silence or a suppressor? Do you want to and all the different options and everything? And then as all the quests and the side quests, and some people really like it, some people don't. Like, how deep into that type of stuff are you guys going into?
So in a traditional like AAA game like Ghost Recon Wildlands or The Division, it would be a game that tried to be all things to all people, right? So like you're saying, like before, like there's cinematics in there, but you also have PvP, but then you might have an open world where you can take over like different bases and things, right? But what I learned, I was really surprised and learned this when I was working on Ghost Recon Wildlands. Like, not everybody likes to play everything, like specifically in Ghost Recon, there's some people who are just really hardcore about just the PvP, but meanwhile, like I'd spent like, years or whatever writing all this narrative stuff, like, right. And we'd shot all these cinematics and they would just skip them as fast as they could, So for us, it makes sense, as players, like, why would we pay for something that we're never going to want? You know what I mean? So it's just like, like if you had basic cable, like I'm watching all the Clint Eastwood movies on TNT, but I'm not watching CNN. Why am I paying for CNN? You know what I mean? So that's our idea of splitting up this one big project that's in a narrative that goes across different games. But that, like, first we'll have in the PvP game. Later this year, we're hoping to start pre-production on just the narrative part. So basically, each game will be like very narrow in focus, so it's really just going to be PvP, like team based for Outflank. But in terms of like personalization and stuff like we were talking about, like one of the reasons we did set it in the 80s was to limit the technology, because it's kind of like at a certain point, like, and this is one of the lessons that I think I learned from Ghost Recon Breakpoint, like drones aren't fun. Like fighting on a battlefield with drones, it's not not the same kind of experience as if it's just, the players and like trying to find out where the other players are.
The image that's coming to my mind when you're describing the gameplay and everything is like old school Bond 007 on N64. You know what I mean? It's like,
that's the
you
juice.
got your gun, I got mine.
Yeah.
Run around. You know what I mean?
That's
like
the feel that we want to have. That kind of fun. Like
old school, old Call of Duty, like where there's the courtyard and there's like you get 2 gun options. Mm-hmm. Good luck, right? I mean, that's
pretty much like more or less. Like for me, it was less Call of Duty, but it was like Halo. You know what I mean? Sure. Like in the barracks, we would literally we'd run cables like between like the barracks rooms, and then we'd just go like 4-on-4, like in the little red versus blue horseshoe that they had. You know?
Yeah.
So, but yeah,
that's
like
awesome.
that's what we think is fun, and like a lot of games with bigger budgets, from like really established IP, properties, franchises, they're probably gonna go really deep into with the bells and whistles and stuff, but if a game's still not fun, it's just not fun, right? So,
how like I saw on your website that there's an island on Fortnite, like Fortnite Island.
Sure.
But if there's people who want to play this right now, is that an option, or is it just like, you have your beta testers, and then once the game is ready for sale, then folks like, where are we at in that process right now?
Okay, so right now with Outflank, we're working on the vertical slice, which is basically like one level. So it's like one basically combat map, one battlefield. And right now we're working towards raising funds so that we can basically fund the rest of the production. Right, the Fortnite Island. That was basically, we wanted to experiment with some ideas. We wanted to test some ideas out and see how they worked in the public, and like it's
no
a
jumping.
really yeah well
No
well
jumping.
it's a very easy place to an affordable place to like prototype something and just to put it right in front of like millions of people. You know what I mean? So basically, one of the pillars of Victory's Grave is that there's a survival aspect to it. You know what I mean? So so what happens if we put people in this, in a PvP situation where they can build some stuff, but not a lot of stuff, not as much as usual when they're doing Fortnite, and we give them a lot less bullets, right?
Yeah.
So that was basically the experiment there, and people played it for a couple days. You know what I mean? But we also learned a heck of a lot about player retention with that as well.
Sure.
But it was, there were learnings from that. And then, the island's still up. There probably aren't very many people visiting it these days. But, we were basically, it was also a test for us to see like, okay, well, how can we release something, And it was a Fortnite Island. And, it's not anything to, for the history bucks, but it is something that we were able to do. So.
Sure. So we're in the process of getting the funding going for to complete the first round of production. The accessibility that it seems like game developers have nowadays, it seems, I don't do it, but it seems like what you're describing is it's a lot more open. That the industry is a lot more, just like with music and a lot of other content creation avenues, like, more people have access to be able to do these things now. Is that accurate? I mean,
100%. It's 100% accurate. I think there are a lot of different tools that make game development more accessible to people, like different game engines that make it easier. Like you don't need to be a master of C++ to be able to ship a game anymore. I
don't know what that means, but I'm saying yes.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So the quality of these games is kind of, it varies. Let me say, you know what I mean?
Sure.
But that said, like, I think it's at the end of the day, I think it's a good thing that people have access to this stuff, coming from publishing, because I also did, I was a bookstore manager for a while, so coming from that side and also a buyer, and it was right when Amazon was coming out, so I was working at a store when the iPad came out, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but even then, it's not like books are gone, you know what I mean? But the difference now is that there's
market's changed.
Yeah, the market's changed. Like there's this whole separate market now of just people self-publishing, you know what I mean? So, and they'll publish huge fantasy series that no one's ever heard of unless you're reading that series. And for that, those few thousand people, that's awesome. That's their jam, and it, makes that writer a living. So
yeah, you bet. Obviously I would imagine, I'm going to go out on a limb here, that you hope more than a few thousand end up playing Outflank, and we hope that happens for you.
Thank you.
When in a few months from now, or however long it takes, will you come back and give us an update about where we're at, so our audience can know where and when and how they can play this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, right now, actually, the game we have a Steam page, Victory's Grave Outflank. So just go on Steam, please wish list it, give it a follow. And then, if you want to support us, or just learn out more about the studio, you can go to oldglorystudios.us.
You bet. I guess I should have asked this earlier. With Outflank, is it going to be console agnostic, or are you you mentioned Halo earlier? Is it going to be an Xbox exclusive or PlayStation exclusive?
Right now we're just focusing on the PC release.
Gotcha.
that is where, like I spoke earlier about the kind of more hardcore, like military simulator kind of players, and they're all in there, and that's kind of who we feel would be like our first adopters. Really, like those games are too difficult for me. You know what I mean? But I figure like, there has been a desire in that from that niche, those people, they would like to have some kind of esport that's a milsim kind of esport, and this checks that box for them. But then also, it's like a lot of people don't know it's actually quite expensive. It can become quite expensive to port your game to other systems, to other platforms. So, and right now it's preventative for us. Like, we're absolutely not against it. Like whether it be like PlayStation, Xbox, or even mobile. Like those are all things that we're definitely considering, and we kind of plan ahead for the possibility of that kind of thing. Like especially in like game menus and stuff, the UI there, like you can tell when some game it's just like, well, this would be easy to navigate if I had a mouse, but now that I have a controller, I can't do anything.
Yeah.
So
gotcha. I guess that's a level of complexity that you don't really think about unless you're making the thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing. We don't want people to have to. We don't want players to have to have the reaction of just like, oh, I should have got this on PC so I could actually like navigate.
Yeah.
So
you bet. Makes sense. All right, sir. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And like I said earlier, when you have an update for us, when Outflank is out there for the masses, writ large, let us know, and we'll let our audience know.
All right. Awesome. All right. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Real quick, I want to thank Lewis for sharing his time and his story with us. If you're interested in helping Lewis and Brian fund their ambitions, you can just go to Old Glory Studios' website on your screen and find the link in the story below. And that's going to just about do it for us on this week's episode of Weapons and Warfare. But before we say adieu, I'm going to spend a few more minutes talking about gaming. If you couldn't tell by that previous segment, I'm a gamer. Video games, board games, yard games. If there's competition involved, I am there for it. Games are great because, they're fun. I mean, duh, right? But games are also highly informative. They can teach us a lot about ourselves and our world. When we were at this year's Modern Day Marine Expo in DC, I saw a booth that really stood out from the rest because unlike all the other vendors featuring weapons, vehicles, drones, electronic warfare devices, or other items meant for the battlefield, the Mission Match booth featured a kids game. Based on the old memory matching game, the purpose is to find matching cards. But Mission Match also features characters from the U.S. service branches. And since it's 2025, there are also QR codes on some of those cards, which take players to sites with all sorts of history and information about different U.S. service organizations.
It also tells the story of something of how these democratic principles have been found in this great nation. And the protector of those is the service, or the men and women that sacrifice every single day and work to protect these great, great principles. And it just tells the story from that age, from 6 and beyond. So the information portal, again, it's not just the actual military services. When they move forward through this portal, what they'll see also is there's other different links. It could be the Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, things that tell the story to give something back to our society.
Now, Mission Match isn't available for commercial sale just yet. The people behind it are still in the process of bringing it to market. But I think the idea behind the game is awesome. The United States of America is such a wonderful nation for so many reasons, and while it's not perfect, we can't let the good we do be forgotten by future generations. And if kids can have some fun while learning about that history and start thinking of ways that they can contribute themselves, all the better. For senior producer Brett Baker, video editor Brian Spencer, and graphics artist Dakota Patillo, I'm Ryan Robertson, Straight Arrow News, signing off.